Good morning. It's great to see everyone. For those of you who are part of this class in 2020 and to anyone new as well, it's great to see everyone. This is kind of part 2 of our series. We ran for 8 weeks before New Year's, and we'll run for 8 weeks now between now and Passover.
Good. Will it be 8 weeks after Passover then too? Or 7?
For this
Pesach and Shavuos?
7 weeks. We'll see. But I actually am going to be taking some paternity leave after Passover, so I think it'll end this year with Passover. My wife is on maternity leave now, but then once she's back at work, I'm going to be taking time. But great to be with everyone. I know for some of you, we explored together synagogues really all over the world in unique communities. I've actually been working on, which I'll share the link to, and I'm still, it's in formation. So everyone, both whether this is the first time you're joining or whether you joined in the past, it's a map that has each synagogue, or it's in formation, but the goal is to have every synagogue that we've looked at a little link on the map that you can click on it and see the synagogue. And in most cases, there will be a website or information about the synagogue.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
After we did the ones in Jerusalem, I happened to be online with my daughter right after that. And Deborah made Aliyah in 2001. And when I mentioned to her about the one synagogue, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it, the one behind the central bus station.
Oh, the Bell's Great Synagogue.
The Bells. She never knew what the building was. In her 19 years.
Oh, right. She's probably seen it many times.
Many times. She never, because I had said to her, next time we're in Israel, God willing, I want to go and see that building, whether we can get in or not. At least I want to be able to see it. And she says, I don't know what the building is. I said, so that's when I told her what it was. I thought it was too funny that here in Cleveland has to tell her what the synagogue was.
Yeah. Here, just a second. Oh, why is there? No, that's good. So we can jump to that quickly, but here's the map. So you can see spread out. I think I'm still missing a few. So if you notice anything, you can always email me or message that it's missing. Some of them, I couldn't find the exact address right away. So they're missing, and the purple ones are places we haven't yet looked at. But for instance,
we've traveled a lot.
We've traveled to every continent except Antarctica, where if anyone knows of a synagogue, a permanent synagogue in Antarctica, let me know. But we have traveled to every continent outside of Antarctica, and I've tried to label them. They're not all labeled exactly correct yet, but it's a work in progress. But you can click, for instance, you see Bell's Great Synagogue, and it takes you to the one that's Bell's Great Synagogue, and you can click on the website if you want to see more about the particular one. Apparently their website can't be right now. Oh no, here. It's moving. But this is the website of the Bells community.
Rabbi, I don't know if you got the pictures I sent you of the Great Synagogue in St. Petersburg.
Now I'm not sure. I saw pictures, so possibly. But yeah, this is also on the map. There's the Grand Choral Synagogue in St. Petersburg.
That's it. Yeah.
It's on the map, and you can click on if you want to learn more. This is in Russian, so you might need to translate. but
my Russian is very rusty.
Your Russian is good, but you can Google is it might not always be perfect, but Google has added this feature that it automatically translates, which is a nice feature to have.
Very helpful.
Excuse me, but how do you get to the map?
Oh, so the map is being shared now, but I put the link. If you go to the messages, if you go to the chat box, I just put the link so you can click on it and see the map on your own screen.
It doesn't work because some people don't have Google accounts.
Oh, you need to have a Google account, I suppose. I didn't realize that it only works with Google.
2 Google accounts and it still didn't work.
What
Okay, I will work on that. It's still a work in progress, but once it's finished, we'll make sure to get it to everyone if whoever's interested.
Right, you sign into your Google account.
But I'm gonna
But how do I get back into them?
stop the share. It was wonderful kind of visiting synagogues around the world and seeing different unique communities. One thing that's true though, and it's true of Jews throughout the generations, and we still see it today, is that as much as we talk about Ashkenazi Jewish communities or Sephardi Jewish communities, Mizrahi, we looked at Italian Jewish communities and Romanian Jewish communities in Greece, Syrian communities, wherever the mountains, wherever these communities are, Jews are really a very transient people. And so, right, Helen gave a great example. The Belz Great Synagogue, which is in Jerusalem, is actually, right, it's actually a rebuilding. That particular example is a much greater building, but was designed based on the synagogue that the Belz community had when they lived in Belz in Ukraine. And in fact, that building, the original synagogue, was designed to resemble the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. But it's true in many cases that when communities move en masse, the community wants a synagogue that is for their community. B'nai Yeshurun was founded as a Hungarian synagogue for the Hungarian immigrants that were coming here to Cleveland. When a community comes en masse, they often bring sometimes a replica of their own building, or sometimes a new building, but designed specifically for their community. I want to visit a few synagogues with you. Let me pull out my internet. It doesn't seem to be working fully the right way right now. Just a second. Oh, here, okay. So, 1 second. Remember our introductory page with all of our synagogues around the world. But I wanted to share two synagogues, and I'd love to talk before we move on. These are two communities in Central and Eastern Europe. David Horaduk is the community where my mother's father, was born and lived the first 30 or so years of his life. We talked about him actually in in one session earlier, that he fled to Lithuania and eventually made his way as a refugee to Shanghai. And we looked at the synagogue of the community in Shanghai. This was the synagogue, one of actually 4 or 5 synagogues, but the only one still standing in his shtetl. David Horaduk at the time was in the Pale of Settlement, kind of on the border of Poland, was sometimes Russia. Modern day, today it's in southern Belarus. I think Nina Rosner, I think your family was from not far from this. If we looked up, just about an hour away.
My mother, Rabbi Josh.
Yeah.
My mother was from Stolin, which was.
Oh, right. I think we've talked about it. So Stolin is actually very close to David Horaduk. Yeah. It's kind of the town over. So this, and I don't know. I didn't look for what's still around in Stolin, but Stolin and David Horaduk were kind of neighboring towns. So I don't know if we're related, but we're landsmen.
there are only walls of the Great Synagogue in Stolin. Last week I found pictures, just walls.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
This is the grandfather for which you named your boy?
Yes, this is the grandfather for which we named our son, yeah.
Which I thought was totally lovely.
Yeah, oh, thank you. If anyone was able to join us for the bris, thank you. But this building actually is standing. It's now used as a local government municipality building, and for whatever reason, this synagogue remained and wasn't destroyed, and so it's being used not for any Jewish function. As far as we know, there really aren't any Jews to speak of in this particular town. One day I'd love to visit it. The synagogue, or the building on the right, or on my right, is the Eaglesbach Synagogue. I don't know if it's on your left or right. I shouldn't say it, but the Eaglesbach Synagogue is meaningful to me. I visited this community with a good friend of mine, who's actually also is a rabbi in New Jersey now. But his family, his father's family, was from Eaglesbach, is a small town outside of Frankfurt, Germany. And today there really aren't any Jews to speak of in Eaglesbach, but we actually were able to go on a trip. We visited Eaglesbach and were able to get a tour actually with an elderly man. This was about 10 years ago, and he was probably in his mid to late 80s at the time. But he remembered my friend's grandparents. They grew up together and knew his family. His great-grandparents were friends. In fact, he was very proud of the fact that his father served as the Shabbos Goy, which he told us about, which was kind of fascinating. He didn't know that we were familiar with the term, but he was talked with pride about the fact that his father had been the Shabbos Goy and would bring milk and other things to them on Shabbos when they weren't able to work or go to the store themselves. This building was the synagogue, and it still is in the town. It actually was converted into residences, and people actually live. It's just housing and residences, but there is a small plaque up and a remnant of the 10 Commandments, which is actually kind of on the front of the building. And today is simply a place where people live, but has been kept up and not destroyed because of that. A fascinating story that this man told as a young teenager. And it was actually a shocking and interesting view into the city where the relations between the Jews and the general non-Jewish community were very good. That he shared that just everyone in Germany, all young teenagers, became part of Hitler Youth in the 1930s. It was a general thing. But he said on Kristallnacht, when there were people that came to communities and so many synagogues were destroyed, that didn't happen in Eaglesbach with the people in the community because there were very good relations, but there were a few outsiders who came to throw things at the synagogue. And the Hitler Youth of the community of Eaglesbach actually banded together to protect the synagogue. And it was an interesting insight to think about the fact that Hitler Youth was kind of the youth group that everyone was required to join. But in this town in particular, there were good relations, and it was Hitler Youth teens that actually came together to protect the synagogue, and is why it wasn't destroyed on Kristallnacht, which was just a very interesting story to hear, and was also very interesting to meet people who knew my friend's family from prior to the war. So I would love if anyone wants to share. We can stop the share. So I know Ruth, you said stolen. I'll make a list. If there's any one community where your family is originally from, whether Europe or elsewhere, or if you didn't grow up or your family didn't grow up Jewish, I would be happy to look what the Jewish roots were, even if it wasn't directly your family. It would be great to hear if we want to go around, and would love to hear and bring some of those synagogues and places that still exist. So I'm marking stolen, which I actually know about because it was the neighboring town. So Maddie and Belarus, possibly close to where my family was from. Good, yeah. Lynn, yeah.
I had two questions. I can't remember if you mentioned anything in Bialystok. My mother's mother came from Bialystok, and that was a place, one day it's Poland, the next day it's Russia. So I'm curious if you had any synagogues there. And the other one is in Lvov, Ukraine. My daughter was adopted from that area.
In where, Lvov?
Lvov, yeah.
Oh, Lvov. Okay, great. There are.
I don't know what's. When we were there, we never saw any synagogues.
So Lvov actually does still have a population, kind of a rebirth following the fall of the Soviet Union. Lvov does have a Jewish community today, even. But I'll look. Sarny.
My father went to school in what was then Lemberg, which is now Lvov.
Oh.
Yes, Lemberg, right, is Lvov today, right.
There's a beautiful synagogue in Lvov that's been restored. I think it may be Chabad, I forget exactly. I have pictures of it from when we were there. They have a school there up through 8th grade, and then they send their children to Israel. But there's the Rose Synagogue in Lvov that was virtually destroyed, but was being brought back. And there's a couple other buildings. I may have them in my notes from when we were in the Ukraine.
Great. So we'll look at many of these next week. I'll see what I can find. I'm writing down all the communities that you're putting down or sharing.
Rabbi?
Yeah, Fran.
In that general region as well, both of my parents were from a border town called Hushatan, Husiatyn. Sometimes in modern Ukrainian, it's spelled Gusiatyn or IN. And I've done considerable research, but you will find that there is a beautiful fortress style synagogue. This is not a one-horse town. And it has an interesting history, the town, because it was the home of a Hasidic court.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually came across that particular synagogue when I've been looking kind of around the world at various synagogues. One that I hadn't been familiar with before, but it's on my something that's on my radar.
Town, because it was a border, because it was the Hasidic court, because it had a relatively well-known Rabbi who led the Jews to Vienna, has a wonderful history.
I had a friend whose family ended up in Harbin, China, before they went to Israel.
Wow, yeah. There was a Jewish community in Harbin, yeah, that ended up there.
There's been a lot on TV about the Jews of China.
Mhm.
Yes, no, there have. So thank you for all of the different places. So we'll look at many of them. I know in Lvov that there is a current Jewish community. I'm not sure about any of the other places, but we will. Thank you for all of the names. I want to share. So Lynn actually mentioned Bialystok. In the case of Bialystok, the community. Oh, sorry. We'll get there in a second. We'll move to Bialystok because the community, many people moved to the Lower East Side alongside millions of Jews in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we'll look at what they built there. But communities try to recreate what they know where they come. And so here is Synagogue Kahal Tzur Yisrael in Recife, Brazil. So the very first Jews to come to the New World came here to Kahal Tzur Yisrael. Sorry, they came to Recife and built a synagogue, which is actually the first synagogue in the New World. I don't know if anyone here has been to Recife or to this synagogue. But Jews first came here in the synagogue was established in 1636 by Jews that were originally Spanish and Portuguese that had taken refuge in the Netherlands, but were part of the first wave of people coming to the New World, the first Jewish wave of people. And they built this congregation in the Sephardic rite, what they knew. So I want to share just some pictures with you. This is the outside. It's not the oldest synagogue in continuous use, which we saw in Curacao earlier, but this synagogue was the very first synagogue established in the New World. And it was Sephardic Jews. This is restored. Today is mostly a museum and mostly a place to visit, but not with active services. But we'll take a look inside to see what the synagogue looks like today. And some of the original brickwork that you can see on the outside, but it's been restored on the inside to look like what it did when it was first constructed. and shows that Judaism, even in the quote unquote New World, still has a pretty long history dating back to 1636.
Rabbi, a few
Yeah.
nights ago on Jeopardy, one of the questions was the oldest continuous synagogue in the world. And the answer was Curacao.
The oldest continuously in the world or in the Western Hemisphere?
Okay, Larry just corrected me, Western Hemisphere.
Western, yeah, because it's not in the world, but in the Western Hemisphere, it is the synagogue in Curacao, right? But this synagogue actually predates the synagogue in Curacao by about 25 years. It just wasn't continuously used as a synagogue from then until now. The Bialystok Synagogue. So Lynn, you're a landsman, right? Came to New York. Not everyone, but enough came that they wanted to establish their own synagogue, and really a beautiful synagogue. It's been restored more recently. But the Bialystok Synagogue, founded in 1905, was built for the Bialystok community. We can take a look at the exterior and the interior. This is the Bialystok Synagogue on the Lower East Side.
Is it still there?
Yes, this is still there.
Oh, I see. Okay, see, I see
This
November
building,
15th. Okay.
I don't believe this was their original building. But this synagogue, this is the current synagogue that exists there, and you can see it's right in the heart of the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Yeah, the Ellsworth Synagogue has been restored, but it's not being used as a synagogue. It's more of a museum.
Oh, the Eldridge Street Synagogue is a site to see. It's a beautiful synagogue that's
Lovely.
used for years, and to see kind of the beauty of the Jewish life that was brought to the Lower East Side.
We missed it on our recent New York trip. So-
Right, we didn't make it to all the synagogues. Maybe we need to have another New York trip.
Yes.
But this is the interior
Cool.
of the Bialystok Synagogue. Has anyone been to the Bialystok Synagogue in New York?
Never heard of it, but it's really, God, it's gorgeous.
You know, it's a gorgeous synagogue and still used to this day. I don't know how many of the current members trace their lineage from Bialystok, but it was originally built as a synagogue for the Bialystok Jews that were coming to New York.
Is it Orthodox? It looks like it.
It is. This is an Orthodox synagogue, yeah. And we can look at the ceiling with here's the synagogue murals as well in frescoes.
They redid the round window at the Ellsworth Street Synagogue. I have pictures of that one. So
Yes.
It's interesting, there's a lobster on the ceiling.
Yeah, no, though, so it's interesting. If you know, yeah, let's go back to the interior of the synagogue. There were some interesting pictures on the top. They appear to be, I would need to look. Sometimes they're the different mazalot. They're symbols connected to the various constellations, which although is not Jewish in origin, there's a long Jewish history of connecting them. But it looks like the pictures are various things. Here is actually a picture of Kever Rachel. This is the burial site of our ancestor Rachel, matriarch. I can't see from the picture. I need to look. I didn't look at what each of these pictures are. Hayarden, right here, the Jordan River. But each picture seems to have some connection to Jewish life or to Israel. So I would need to look up and get back to you on what the lobster connects to, but it may be the constellation symbol. And there are connections all the way into ancient Israel with findings of synagogue floors that have the constellations in them. A Judaized version of the constellations. So some communities built their own synagogues. This synagogue, I know I mentioned, I think the Berkowitzes yesterday. This is a synagogue that I prayed at sometimes. It's near the Jewish Theological Seminary and Columbia University, where I was a student. This is on 110th Street in Manhattan, Ramat Ora. And this synagogue was founded in 1941 by a group of 62 Jews who escaped from Luxembourg during the Holocaust. And they founded this synagogue, you can see founded 1942. And they chose to name their synagogue for their country, Luxembourg. They said Lux means light and Berg means heights or mountains. And so Ramah means heights, like Berg, Ramat, and Or is light, Ora. So the name Ramat Ora is a Hebrew version of the word Luxembourg. So they actually named their congregation for their country, Ramat Ora.
I've been to that shul.
And Ramat Ora today, great. Do you have any recollection from your time at the synagogue?
No, I just visited.
You visited it.
Yeah.
So, right. Again, I don't know how many current members of this congregation are actually descended from Jews in Luxembourg, but today this is actually a leading synagogue in the modern Orthodox movement, the most liberal wing of the Orthodox movement. In fact, originally housed in this building before they moved elsewhere was the Liberal Orthodox Seminary, which began ordaining kind of as in competition to Yeshiva University, and they spun off a school called Maharat, Yeshivat Maharat, which is ordaining women, ostensibly Orthodox Jewish women as clergy. It's not accepted by much of the Orthodox world, but that was kind of founded by leaders here in this synagogue.
I was there with Penina Schramm, who lived in the neighborhood at that time.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. So a few examples of Jews kind of coming and recreating a synagogue based on the place where they came from. This synagogue, the Montefiore Synagogue, I don't know if anyone's been here, the Montefiore Synagogue and Mausoleum at Ramsgate in the United Kingdom. When you have enough money, you can bring your synagogue to wherever you want and recreate it. In this case, Montefiore had an estate. He visited with his wife on their honeymoon. Ramsgate, and they fell in love with the place and he had a very large estate, and he commissioned a synagogue to be built for himself and his family using the right of the Bevis Marks Synagogue in London, which is where he attended. And so he had his own synagogue built in his place, a beautiful synagogue, as well as when they died, they had commissioned a mausoleum, which was built to be a replica of Rachel's tomb in Israel, where he's buried. Moses Montefiore, of course, a major philanthropist who gave a lot to the state of Israel. You may be familiar with Yamin Moshe, the neighborhood that he really sponsored, the first neighborhood, that and Mishkanot Sha'ananim, the first neighborhoods outside of the old city in Jerusalem that were built, that he financed. And there's now a windmill. He had this idea that they could use a windmill for the economy, and like he saw in the Netherlands and elsewhere. Today, the windmill is more of a landmark site rather than an actual use. but he had this synagogue commissioned for himself, and so this case wasn't a community, but a single person who had the means to have his own synagogue built on his property. Has anyone been to the Rams? Before we move to this synagogue, has anyone been to Ramsgate or to the Montefiore estate?
No.
Okay, good. So I want to move this synagogue. Some of you may have been to, I'm sure, the Italian Synagogue in Jerusalem, and really one of my favorite places in Jerusalem to visit and to pray at as well. Because of this, in part because of the story and the beauty of this synagogue. The Italian synagogue was from a community, a small village between Padua and Venice. And the synagogue itself was transplanted. It's the actual synagogue that was in use for hundreds of years, I think built in the 1600s, and was in use through World War I when it went into disuse. And Italian Jews, when they started moving to Israel, wanted an Italian synagogue befitting what they thought was kind of befitting the beauty of their community. And they actually kind of deconstructed and reconstructed the entire synagogue in Jerusalem. And it's now an active synagogue as well as an Italian Jewish museum right in the heart of the center of Jerusalem. And we'll take a tour of the synagogue, and then I would love to hear, if there's anyone who's visited the synagogue, your experiences in the synagogue. So here is, the bima is actually in the center, as you can see, where the davening takes place. And people actually in this synagogue sit opposite one another. There's no seats facing the ark, except in the very back of the room you can sit, but really it's around the side of the walls. We saw this in the Greek Romanian synagogues as well. The beautiful ark here with the gold handiwork. Here's a close-up here on the ark that was brought from Italy. This was an Orthodox synagogue, still is, and you can see the balcony is also the balcony was for women, but sitting opposite one another. Chandelier. And then here's the ark in the middle, and then we'll just go back. It's not a very large room. It's usually packed on Shabbat. In fact, they usually discourage visiting groups because they just have barely enough room for their community. But doesn't stop visitors from often trying to, to come in. I'll also share that the Italians are known for their Kiddush. God willing, when we're able to go back in person to synagogues, their Kiddush was always known as being among, if not the best in Jerusalem to go to for, really could be a full meal. But they were always known as having a wonderful Kiddush. But
it looks like a primrose design or something like that on the ark and also on the cover piece on the bima. I wonder if that has some specific relevance to this congregation. The floral design there.
Right, the floral design was used. It was used in many synagogues. Really, sorry, it's a little finicky right now, but the floral design is used. We saw it in Tzfat as well, not with the gold leaf, but we saw some of these designs from nature that was kind of a decorative style in the era that it was built. I don't know if there's a particular significance beyond that in this synagogue. And when it was built, of course, the 10 Commandments, we can see both on the top and here on the ark to signify kind of the Jewish significance of the
And the columns, they're grapevines.
Right.
Right, these are grapevines along the columns. Good to know.
I went to a Romanian synagogue in Jerusalem. I was there for Rosh Hashanah many years ago.
Ah, good.
And the layout was very similar. And they had a wonderful choir of men and boys for Rosh Hashanah. It was really beautiful.
Oh, good. Yeah, I don't know specifically about that that particular synagogue. There is a Romanian American synagogue actually that is no longer being used, but I'll show a picture because, like from Bialystok, Jews coming from Romania came in large numbers, and they built a beautiful synagogue as well. I'll just try to share a few pictures here on from Google Images that you can see that Romanian Jews coming to the Lower East Side, they built their own synagogue as well. The Romanian here, first Romanian American congregation, Sha'arei Shamayim. And this was like Bialystok. Jews coming from Romania said, we want a place for our own, for our community.
Yeah, the Machzorim for Rosh Hashanah, they had Romanian on one side of the page and the other side was Hebrew.
Right, good, and that's the same is
That's
true
what
with
the Italian synagogue has.
Yep.
The Italian Synagogue has the same idea with Hebrew and Italian. I actually purchased a Siddur, which I now have here. That's the Italian Rite, which is different from Ashkenazi or Sephardi communities.
Yes.
The Italian has their own sect, really, and perhaps along with the Romanian community, even more ancient than Sephardi or Ashkenazi Jews. Jews have been living in Italy since the time of the Second Temple. There were Jewish communities noted in Rome and elsewhere.
Yeah, there was a travel program where the guide was an Italian woman, and she made much of the fact that there was an Italian Jewish community that predates, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic community. That she said they were there as diplomats and they did business.
No, it's true that Jews were in Rome and in Italy before even the destruction of the Second Temple. It was the Roman Empire, and just as people travel today for work, right? You can imagine that Rome was a center of business and culture, and Jews made their way there over 2,000 years ago.
That's what she was talking about. Yeah.
And even beyond that, the Jewish community stayed strong and vibrant. In fact, the oldest use today is from Italy. The oldest kosher Torah scroll dates from the year 1250 and is in a community in Italy. And in fact, an even older Torah scroll that's still complete, although was deemed to not be fully kosher, is from even 100 years earlier than that in Milan. One notable thing is that as the community predates other communities, they actually designed their Torah scroll differently. Although it looks very similar to an Ashkenazi Torah scroll, it's actually longer. The pages are longer and it's much thinner. There's a lot more on each page. And here you can see it decorated with these very long Etz Chaims and Rimonim. And it might be hard to tell in the picture, but it's much thinner than the Torah scroll we're used to, the Ashkenaz Torah scroll, covered in kind of in this robe, which looks similar, but is actually its own unique design, different from both the Ashkenazi and of course the Sephardi Torah scrolls. The Italian Torah scroll is unique in its own way. A longer, thinner scroll on usually thinner Etz Chaim wooden poles. And still used, sorry, Helen?
No, go ahead.
I was saying still in use at the Italian Synagogue in Jerusalem and in Italian communities throughout Italy and the world.
Yeah, I've been to the synagogue in Florence, and I've been to all of the ones in Venice.
It's interesting with this synagogue, the synagogue tours that they offer. You can take one in English or you can take in different languages. And the one that we took in English, we were able to go behind the scenes of the museum and watching them restore the various different things that they have. It's not young people doing it. It's older people sitting there and meticulously sewing stitch by stitch to repair the parochas and the other pieces that have come over, and they are still bringing stuff over from Italy that eventually will go into this museum. It's an extremely interesting exhibit of the museum repairs.
We went to the synagogue in Siena, Italy, a number of years ago, and it was really kind of disappointing because Siena was considered like the Jerusalem of Europe for a good time in early Italian Jewish life. And that's where the scholars came from and everything. And it's hard to find. It's not well marked. You have to know where you're going to find it. And they only let in maybe 8 people at a time for one reason or another. But the funny thing about it when we went, and it's really not remarkable inside, I might add, but the funny thing is we were waiting in this courtyard for our turn to go in with the 6 or 8 people that were standing there around us, because it was an English-speaking tour. And I see the people who are coming out, and there's Rabbi Susan Stone from Cleveland.
Ah,
The odds weren't good.
Small world.
I've been to the
Good.
synagogue in Dubrovnik, and they have difficulty maintaining it, and they ask people to give donations because apparently they just have 12 Jewish families left there.
Yeah,
all the
we'll
young
visit, not
people
today, but at a
away.
later. Yeah, we'll visit the synagogue in Dubrovnik later on, not today, but it is actually, right, a struggling Jewish community, but still trying to hold on. In fact, considered the oldest Sephardic synagogue in the world.
Actually, I think
that's been in
Sarajevo had a
continuous
much
use.
bigger presence in the Jewish world than Dubrovnik, from what I understand.
Sorry, what was?
I thought Sarajevo had a bigger presence in the Jewish world than Dubrovnik.
Yeah, no, it did, but the synagogue in Dubrovnik is the oldest Sephardic synagogue in continuous use to this day, and hopefully it will be able to remain in continuous use as they're struggling just because people are leaving for elsewhere.
It's also a seaport, so they had access.
Right, but no, I think
people.
Fran is right. Sarajevo, I do think had the larger Jewish community at one time, right? And maybe still today, as Dubrovnik doesn't have such a big, has a very small number left. So I do want to share, in the time we have left, the Jews went all over the world and built what they knew. This is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Lubumbashi, the first Jews from Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania made their way, and they built a wooden synagogue in the mold of the wooden synagogues they knew. To be their community for people coming from their part of the world. And so here we are in Congo, and we have a synagogue still active, by the way, a synagogue in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, built in 1930.
I would have thought that the picture on the right was showing a church today because of the way the windows are framed.
Yeah, the windows do look like they're framed, but if you look in the back, there's the menorah and the Jewish stars around the bima. I actually
Well,
looked
some
at
of
the
our
picture
old
and-
buildings here in Cleveland still have the menorahs and the Jewish stars. If you go to the one on 82nd,
Right.
on the corner of every pew, is got the wooden menorah or Jewish star.
No, it's true. There are, you see a lot in former synagogues. In this particular case, at least from a little research, there actually is a rabbi still, and it is still, I don't know how often they have services, but my understanding is that it still runs as a synagogue. Yeah, Ruth.
Do you have a picture of the front so we can see what it says? The front
Oh,
of
what the words are in a better
Yeah.
picture?
yeah.
Let me see if I can pull one up quickly. I think it just says the name of the synagogue as it was when it was built, but let me see if I can pull up an image that can really see the words there. Oh,
There
here,
is a
okay.
Jewish community in the Congo?
So there aren't many Jews there today, of course, but when it was first annexed and colonized by Europeans after 1885, there were Jews that started to move there. In most Jews have left, especially as it became an independent country and it was no longer a Belgian, the Belgian Congo. It wasn't a Belgian province. Most Jews did leave. At the time of independence, there were about 2,500 Jews. Most have left. In 2013, which is the most recent I can get information here, there were about 320 Jews, and they were mostly settled in this community, Lubumbashi. So there is a small Jewish community still there today. Most Jews have left. And at its height was when it was a Belgian province, a Belgian territory. So here's a picture. I did just find a picture though, that I can pull up, that we can read. Here, sorry, loading image. This is the image. So Beit Tfilah Yikareh Lecha. Oh, so it's actually, it doesn't have the name of the synagogue. I was incorrect. Ruth, if you can read it. Ki Beiti Beit Tfilah Yikareh Lechol Ha'amim. This is a verse in the books of the prophets. Because my house is a house of prayer, will call out to all nations of the world. Can you read that, Ruth? Ki beiti beit tefillah yikareh lechol ha'amim is a verse from scripture.
Yeah,
but
I'm
still-
sorry, I was muted. Yeah, ki beit tefillah yikareh lechol ha'amim. Yes.
So this synagogue is still in use for the 300 or so Jews that still live in this community. But yeah, there are Jews, as we've seen already, in unexpected places. Ellen, yeah.
Nothing.
Oh, okay. But I don't know if that's a synagogue I'll ever visit, but would certainly be interesting to see the community still there today.
While I was looking up to see if there was a picture of that synagogue in Congo, I found this site called Sub-Saharan African Synagogues. And there's a whole, I don't know if you've seen.
Yeah, there's an interesting site and a collector. There's someone who's kind of collected and visited and to collect all of as many sub-Saharan synagogues and places where Jewish life has existed or still exists, which is a fascinating thing. And we might look at some more synagogues that have been that are on that website as well in the future, right? AfricanSynagogues.org, definitely worth checking out if you're interested. This building, some of you may be familiar with. Can anyone tell me what this is?
That looks like,
Headquarters?
that's Eastern Parkway.
Yes, good. So for those who are familiar, this is 770 Eastern Parkway, the home of the Lubavitcher Rabbi, and now Chabad World Headquarters. As we've seen others recreate their buildings, some in the Chabad world have looked to recreate exact replicas of the Rebbe's house. In fact, there are more than 20 exact replicas around the world today of 770. So this is the original building. This is the building in Brooklyn, 770 Eastern Parkway, Brooklyn, Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters. I pulled some pictures from this article. The original building. These aren't all of them, but here in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the exact replica of 770 Eastern Parkway in a different location, but this is Sao Paulo, or sorry, this one is Ramat Shlomo in Jerusalem. Sorry, I read above. We'll see the picture from Brazil later. You can see kind of the Jerusalem stone, the building a little out of place in Jerusalem, but there it is in Ramat Shlomo neighborhood, an Orthodox neighborhood in Jerusalem.
That's hysterical.
And here in Kfar Chabad near Tel Aviv, they built right with palm trees next to it. This is a building from Brooklyn, placed near Tel Aviv.
We didn't have palm trees in Brooklyn when I lived there.
Here, this is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in between skyscrapers in Brazil. A recreation. All of these are synagogues and Jewish centers in their various communities. Here in Milan, Italy, right in the middle of an Italian street, here we have the Chabad World Headquarters replica as their synagogue. And in this is Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles. And here even recreated at a camp, Camp Gan Israel, a Chabad summer camp in Montreal, or near Montreal. So those are just a couple examples. I'll pull up Chabad in Melbourne, Australia also is another example. Where if I put
basically,
Chabad.
So they all have the original replica of the building.
Right.
It's like the restaurants that say, we've got the world's best coffee. So-
Right, so here you can see as an image, these are 6 buildings in 6 different cities around the world, but all pretty much identical to one another in an attempt to actually create an exact replica. So that's something that the Chabad community has done over 20 times in cities all over the world.
It's hilarious.
This phone.
Yeah, Josh, Rabbi,
Yeah.
is the one on Green Road a little bit characteristic?
Oh, it might be.
You know, the
I
one-
never thought about it that way. It's certainly not an exact replica, but they might have tried to take elements. That's a good question. I would need to ask someone in the community. So finally today, I want to look at what's being done today. This is the Edmond Safra Synagogue. It actually is not yet built or not yet completed. In Brooklyn, a beautiful synagogue. This is the Syrian Jewish community, which is largely based, the Syrian Jewish community largely based in Brooklyn. Actually, it's also, there is a very large number of Syrian Jews in Deal, New Jersey, if you're familiar with, as a suburb.
Totally.
Rabbi Ruth Luria is from Deal, New Jersey, one of the few non-Syrian Jews who's from Deal, New Jersey. I don't know if you knew that.
Where are they building this synagogue in Brooklyn?
Well, we'll look, I have an article I can pull up. I need to check. But we'll look at the synagogue in the article in a second. But a beautiful synagogue being planned here. This is what the exterior will look like. Status unbuilt, right? I don't know if they have I don't know if I'll need to look for the location. But this is what they're planning for. Really a very elegant building for the Syrian community. We just looked at what the sanctuary will look like.
Mhm.
And then the plans for the synagogue. But so it's been done throughout history, and it is still being done today. Here's a picture of what the planned building is for the Syrian Jewish community. And so hopefully that building will be built at some point for the community. And so it can be another site visited once we do our tour of Brooklyn, which I'm not sure when Men's Club and Sisterhood is planning that. Lynn, yeah.
There's another one with the same name of the synagogue. It's in Aventura, Florida. It's near,
Yeah,
Fort
so
Lauderdale.
the Safra family is a very affluent family that's given money around the world, actually, for synagogues. We'll visit a synagogue. Actually, it can be a trivia question because it's also named for Safra. What country in the world outside of Israel has the highest percentage of, has Jews as the highest percentage of the total population in the country? Does anyone have a guess or no?
Florida.
Florida.
Used to be
State.
Brooklyn. Used to be Brooklyn.
Right, Brooklyn. Right, as a city, right, Manhattan is 22.5% Jewish, right, or Brooklyn is a very high percentage. In fact, New York State as a state, mostly centered, of course, New York City in that area, but as a state is over 16% Jewish, 16% Jewish. But as a country, the United States is only about 2% Jewish. Does anyone know? Here in our last few minutes, so we'll visit next week the synagogue built also, though, with under the Safra name. The Safras gave money for this synagogue as well. No guesses?
No. Wait. Rephrase that. Try that one again.
What country has the highest percentage of its population is Jewish? Let me add, in what country are there more Jews by percent per capita than any other country, except for Israel? Israel, of course, is the highest at roughly between 75 and 80% of Israel is Jewish.
Argentina or Mexico.
Good guess, but no, there are large populations, especially in Buenos Aires. We'll look at a synagogue later. Maddie says Gibraltar, which is Gibraltar would be if it were a country standing alone. It does have the highest percentage by territory. Gibraltar, which we visited, actually has a wonderful Jewish community, but Gibraltar isn't a country, so I wasn't considering Gibraltar in the number. It's a territory of the United Kingdom, but similar idea. It's a country that's very small, and so it can have even with a small number of Jews be a high percentage. I mean, it's Monaco actually.
That was big.
That was going to be your guess. So
And
Gibraltar,
Andorra and Monaco.
Maddie is correct. Gibraltar actually is the highest percentage of any territory outside of Israel. But as an independent country, although Monaco is probably the same size as Gibraltar, if not smaller, it's not a large independent country. But about 5% of Monaco's population is Jewish, which is only about 3,000 total people. But they've recently had a synagogue built just in the last 10 years with funding from the Safra family. That we'll visit next time. Yeah, Ruth.